The first gunshot rang through the valley like thunder on a cloudless day, drawing Abigail Anders' frightened gaze toward the hills. She gathered her 4 daughters close, shielding them with her trembling body as hoofbeats pounded the hard, packed earth of their small homestead. Wyoming Territory, 1879, was no place for a woman alone with 4 hungry mouths to feed, especially when her husband's family believed those mouths should have belonged to sons. "Inside, quickly," Abigail whispered, ushering her girls, Mary, just 10 years old, Elizabeth, 8, Catherine, 5, and little Sarah, barely 3, through the cabin door. Her eldest clutched the family Bible to her chest while the others simply clutched each other, wide-eyed and silent. "They're coming back, aren't they, Ma?" Mary asked, her small voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Abigail nodded, unable to lie to her children. Her father-in-law, Silas Anders, and his sons had made their intentions clear when they'd visited 3 days prior. No woman who bore only girls was fit to inherit their son and brother's land. It didn't matter that Thomas had died loving his daughters fiercely, or that his last words had been a promise to Abigail that the homestead would be theirs. The Anders men had other ideas. "Remember what I told you," Abigail said, checking the meager supplies she'd packed in anticipation of this moment. "If anything happens to me, you run for Mrs. Patterson's place. Don't stop for anything." The sound of approaching horses grew louder, and Abigail peered through the small window. Her breath caught in her throat as she counted 6 riders, not just the 3 she'd expected. Silas had brought reinforcements. The last 3 months had been a slow starvation. After Thomas died of fever, his family had systematically cut them off from the community. No one would buy their eggs or vegetables. The general store in Silver Creek mysteriously ran out of supplies whenever Abigail arrived. Even the church had turned its back when Silas, a prominent elder, spread word that Abigail had cursed their bloodline by bearing only girls. The riders stopped in front of the cabin, dust billowing around the horses' legs. Abigail recognized her father-in-law's imposing figure and the silhouettes of her brothers-in-law, Jedediah and Caleb. "Come out, woman," Silas bellowed, his voice carrying easily through the thin wooden walls. "We've come for what's rightfully ours." Abigail pressed a quick kiss to each daughter's forehead. "Stay hidden under the bed, don't make a sound." She stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind her. The summer sun beat down mercilessly, but the chill in her bones had nothing to do with temperature. She stood tall on the porch, her husband's shotgun held loosely at her side a bluff, as she had no shells. "This land belongs to me and my daughters now, Silas," she called, keeping her voice steady. "Thomas wanted it that way." Silas spat in the dirt. "No son of mine would leave good Anders' land to a pack of useless girls." He dismounted, his boots raising small clouds of dust as he approached. "We're taking possession today. You can leave peaceable-like, or we can remove you." The threat hung in the air like the scent of rain before a storm. Behind Silas, his sons and 3 other men she didn't recognize waited on horseback, hands resting too casually near their holstered guns. "We have nowhere to go," Abigail said, hating the pleading note that crept into her voice. "These girls are your granddaughters, your nieces, your own blood." "No grandsons of mine," Silas growled. "A woman who can't give sons is as useless as sand in a well. We've been patient, Abigail, given you time to mourn and pack. That time's up." A movement on the distant ridge caught Abigail's eye, a lone rider, silhouetted against the afternoon sky. For a moment, hope flared in her chest, quickly extinguished by reality. No one would come to their aid. Not anymore. "You have until sundown," Silas said, turning back toward his horse. "After that, we burn what we can't use." As the men began to move away, the cabin door creaked open, and little Sarah toddled out, crying for her mother. Abigail lunged to scoop her up, but Jedediah was faster, grabbing the child by her arm. "Might as well start taking what's ours," he said with a cruel smile. "The girl can learn to cook and clean for proper men." "Let her go," Abigail screamed, dropping the shotgun and rushing forward. Caleb intercepted her, shoving her roughly to the ground. The other 3 girls burst from the cabin, running to their mother's aid. In the chaos that followed, Abigail found herself pinned to the ground by Caleb while Jedediah and the other men rounded up her screaming daughters. "Put them in the wagon," Silas ordered. "We'll decide what to do with them later." Through tear-blurred vision, Abigail saw the rider from the ridge galloping toward them, closing the distance with remarkable speed. She barely registered the gleaming badge on his chest as he pulled his horse to a stop before them. "What's happening here?" The stranger's voice cut through the commotion, deep and authoritative. "None of your concern, stranger," Silas said, turning to face the newcomer. "Family business." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. Dark hair peeked from beneath his hat, and eyes the color of a summer storm surveyed the scene. "I'm Deputy Marshal Kieran Zane," he said, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "And I make it my business when I see a woman and children being manhandled." Abigail struggled to her feet, dirt streaking her tear-stained face. "They're trying to take my daughters," she said, her voice breaking, "and our home." Marshal Zane's gaze swept over the frightened girls, then back to Silas and his men. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Is that so?" he asked quietly. Too quietly, Silas puffed out his chest. "This property belongs to the Anders men, always has. My son's dead, and his widow here failed to provide heirs." 4 children standing right there, Zane observed dryly. "Girls," Silas spat. "Worthless for continuing the Anders name." The marshal's expression hardened. "Last I checked, the law recognizes a man's widow and children as his rightful heirs, regardless of their sex." He turned to Abigail. "Do you have papers for this land, madam?" "In the house," she whispered, hope beginning to bloom. "My husband left everything to us." Silas stepped forward. "Now see here, Marshal, you're overstepping." I suggest you and your men stand down," Zane interrupted, his hand still resting on his pistol. "Unless you'd like to discuss this further at the territorial jail in Cheyenne." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Jedediah released Sarah, who ran sobbing to her mother. Abigail gathered her close, watching as the standoff continued. Silas's face darkened with rage. "This isn't over," he growled, mounting his horse. "We'll be back with the sheriff. He knows what's right." "You do that," Marshal Zane replied evenly. "I'll be here." After the men had ridden away, disappearing over the nearest hill, Abigail collapsed to her knees, gathering all 4 daughters in her arms. They clung to her, trembling like aspen leaves in a strong wind. "Thank you," she managed through her tears, looking up at the marshal. "They would have taken everything." Kieran Zane knelt beside them, his expression softening. "Are you and your girls all right, madam?" Abigail nodded, though it wasn't entirely true. They were alive and together, but they were far from all right. The Anders family wouldn't give up easily, and the marshal couldn't stay forever. "We'll manage," she said, rising shakily to her feet. "We always have." Zane looked at the small, weathered cabin, the struggling garden, and the nearly empty corral. His gaze lingered on the thin faces of the children. "When was the last time you all had a proper meal?" he asked quietly. Mary, always the brave one, answered before Abigail could. "Tuesday last, sir." "We had a rabbit paws trap caught before he—" She trailed off, eyes downcast, Abigail flushed with shame. "The town's turned against us. We make do with what we can grow and catch." Without another word, Kieran Zane strode to his horse, reached into his saddlebag, and pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. He returned and handed it to Abigail. "Jerky and hardtack," he said. "Not much, but it'll tide you over." As Abigail murmured her thanks, the marshal surveyed the property once more. "Those men will be back, Mrs. Anders. Abigail Anders, Mrs. Anders. They'll return, and likely with more men. Even if your papers are in order, frontier justice has a way of overlooking legalities when it suits certain parties." The truth of his words settled heavily on Abigail's shoulders. "What would you have us do, Marshal? This is our home. We have nowhere else to go." Kieran's expression turned thoughtful. I'm headed to Fort Laramie. There's a settlement growing there with law and order and people who won't care how many daughters you have. He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. I could escort you there. Hope and despair warred within Abigail's heart. Leave the home Thomas had built with his own hands, the place where they'd been happy, where she'd given birth to their children. But staying meant facing Silas and his sons again, and next time there might not be a marshal riding by at the crucial moment. I need to think, she said finally. Kieran nodded. I'll help you secure things for the night. We can discuss it further in the morning. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land Thomas had loved, Abigail watched Marshal Zane chop firewood with efficient strokes. He had already checked the perimeter of the property, repaired a broken hinge on the door, and brought in fresh water from the well. His horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding, grazed contentedly in the corral alongside their aging mule. Inside the cabin, the girls were more animated than they'd been in months, cleaning up for supper and peppering the marshal with questions whenever he came inside. Abigail found herself smiling despite everything, watching as her daughters responded to the man's quiet strength and gentle manner. When darkness fell, they shared a simple meal made more substantial by the marshal's provisions. Abigail tried not to notice how handsome Kieran looked in the firelight, his strong profile outlined against the cabin wall as he told the girls a story about a clever fox outwitting a pack of wolves. Like us, Catherine said sleepily. We're the fox and Grandpa Anders is the mean old wolf. Kieran's gaze met Abigail's over the child's head. That's right, he said softly, and foxes are survivors. Later, after the girls were asleep in the cabin's single bed, Abigail joined Kieran on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds on black cloth. Thank you for today, she said, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. I was just doing my job, Mrs. Anders. Abigail, please, he nodded. Abigail, I have to ask, why did your father-in-law wait until now? Your husband's been gone how long? 6 months, she replied, grief still sharp in her voice. Thomas caught fever after getting caught in a spring storm. He held on for 2 weeks before. She swallowed hard. Silas gave us the courtesy of a mourning period. 3 months to grieve, and 3 months to, as he put it, find a proper man to take us in. When I refused to remarry according to his choosing, he decided to take matters into his own hands. Kieran's jaw tightened. And the town turned against you too. Silas Anders has deep pockets and a long memory, Abigail said simply. Few in Silver Creek are willing to cross him, even for Thomas's widow and children. They fell silent, listening to the night sounds: crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft nickering of horses in the corral. What will you do? Kieran finally asked. Abigail stared into the darkness. What choice do I have? We can't stay here, not with Silas determined to drive us out, but starting over. She shook her head. It's terrifying. I meant what I said about Fort Laramie, Kieran offered. It's a growing place. They need teachers, seamstresses, all sorts of skills. A woman of your fortitude would find opportunity there. My fortitude, Abigail repeated with a sad smile. Is that what you call it when a woman fails to feed her children properly for months? Kieran turned to face her. I call it strength when a woman stands alone against men who would take everything from her, when she keeps her daughters safe and together despite impossible odds. His voice was low, intense. Don't mistake survival for failure, Abigail. Something warm and unexpected unfurled in Abigail's chest at his words. No one had spoken to her with such respect since Thomas died. No one had seen her struggle as anything but weakness. Dawn comes early, she said finally, rising from her seat. We should rest. Kieran nodded, but as she turned to go inside, he spoke again. Whatever you decide, I'll help you. You have my word. That night, Abigail lay awake long after the cabin had fallen silent, her daughters soft breathing the only sound. She thought of Thomas, of the life they'd built, of his final words to her. Take care of our girls. They're stronger than anyone knows, just like their mother. By morning, she had made her decision. The dawn broke crisp and clear, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Abigail found Kieran already awake, tending to the horses. "We'll come with you," she said without preamble. "To Fort Laramie." He straightened, studying her face. "You're certain?" "No," she admitted, "but I'm certain of what will happen if we stay." Kieran nodded. "We should leave today." "As soon as possible." They worked quickly, Abigail packing their meager belongings while Kieran repaired the wagon that had sat unused since Thomas's death. The girls helped where they could, excited by the prospect of adventure despite the solemnity of leaving their home. "Can we really take everything, Ma?" Elizabeth asked, carefully wrapping their few pieces of china in cloth. "Only what matters most," Abigail replied, running her hand over Thomas's rocking chair. "Some things would have to be left behind." By midday, the wagon was loaded with their essential possessions: clothing, tools, Thomas's Bible, seeds for planting, the family portraits, and the quilt Abigail's mother had made for her wedding. Everything else: the furniture Thomas had crafted, the curtains Abigail had sewn, the marks on the doorframe showing the girls' growth would remain. As Kieran helped the girls into the wagon, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. Riders, at least 8 of them, approaching fast. "It's Grandpa," Mary said, her voice small with fear. Kieran's expression hardened. "Get in the wagon, Abigail, now." "There's no time," she protested. "The wagon's too slow, they'll catch us before we reach the pass." For a moment, Kieran stood still, calculating, then he turned to his horse. "Change of plans. Get the girls." Abigail didn't question him. She gathered her daughters, whispering reassurances as Kieran quickly redistributed supplies, taking only what was absolutely necessary and securing it to his saddle. "What are you doing?" Abigail asked as he approached them. "Saving your family," he replied simply. Then, in a series of swift movements, he lifted each of the girls onto his horse, Mary and Elizabeth seated behind the saddle, Catherine and Sarah in front. "Abigail," he said, extending his hand. "Do you trust me?" The riders were close enough now that she could make out Silas's distinctive hat. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked at her daughters, clinging to Kieran's horse, their eyes wide with fear and excitement. She took his hand. "Yes." With surprising strength, he pulled her up behind him. The horse snorted at the unusual burden but stood steady. "Hold tight," Kieran instructed, and then they were moving, the powerful animal carrying all 6 of them away from the cabin, away from the approaching riders, taking a deer trail that led into the woods rather than the main road. Behind them, Abigail heard shouts of anger. Ahead lay uncertainty but also possibility. They rode hard for hours, Kieran guiding his horse with expert precision through forest and field, across streams and through narrow passes where the pursuing riders couldn't follow with their wagon. The girls, despite their fear, remained quiet, understanding instinctively that their safety depended on it. By nightfall, they had put significant distance between themselves and Silas's men. Kieran finally allowed the horse to slow to a walk, eventually stopping in a small clearing sheltered by pines. "We'll rest here," he said, helping them all dismount. The girls collapsed on the soft pine needles, exhausted from the tension and the journey. Abigail stroked the horse's sweating neck. "Will he be all right? That was a lot of weight to carry." "Ajax is the strongest horse in the territory," Kieran said with affection, removing the saddle to let the animal cool properly. "But yes, we'll need to find an alternative soon. We can't travel all the way to Fort Laramie like this." As Kieran set up a small, nearly smokeless fire and prepared a simple meal from their supplies, Abigail settled her daughters, checking them for injuries and soothing their fears. Despite everything, they seemed more excited than frightened now that the immediate danger had passed. "Is Marshal Zane going to be our new pa?" Catherine asked innocently as Abigail tucked a blanket around her. The question caught Abigail off guard. "No, sweetheart. The Marshal is helping us get to safety, that's all." But later, as the girls slept in a pile like puppies and Abigail sat beside Kieran at the fire, she found herself wondering about the man who had risked so much for strangers. "Why did you help us?" she asked softly. "You could have ridden past, most would have." Kieran was silent for a long moment, poking at the embers with a stick. "When I was 10, he finally said, "my mother and sister were driven from our home after my father died. No one helped them." His voice was steady but carried an old pain. "I found them 2 years later in a pauper's grave in St. Louis." Abigail's heart ached for the boy he had been. "I'm sorry," he shrugged. "It was a long time ago, but I swore if I ever saw another family in that situation, I wouldn't ride past." He glanced at the sleeping girls. "Besides, they remind me of Sophia, my sister." She would have been about Mary's age now. Understanding dawned in Abigail's heart. "So this is about your sister?" Kieran met her gaze, something unreadable in his eyes. "It started that way," he admitted. "But now—" He shook his head. "Get some rest, Abigail. Tomorrow will be another long day." The next morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. They traveled more cautiously, Kieran alternating between riding and walking to spare Ajax. By midday, they reached a small trading post where Kieran was known. The proprietor, a grizzled old trapper named Harmon, greeted them with surprise. "Zane, didn't expect to see you with a ready-made family in tow." Kieran explained their situation while Abigail and the girls waited anxiously. To her relief, Harmon nodded in understanding. "Silas Anders is well known for his meanness," the old man said. "I've got a wagon you can use, not pretty, but it'll get you to the fort." With the wagon secured and supplies replenished, they set out again, making better time with Kieran riding ahead as scout while Abigail drove the wagon with the girls. Each night, they camped beside streams or in sheltered groves, and each day, Abigail found herself watching Kieran with growing admiration. He was patient with the girls, teaching them to identify animal tracks and which berries were safe to eat. He treated Abigail with unfailing respect, never presuming or pushing boundaries, yet always attentive to her needs and concerns. On the 4th night of their journey, as they sat by the fire after the girls had fallen asleep, Abigail finally asked the question that had been growing in her mind. "What will happen when we reach Fort Laramie?" Kieran looked up from cleaning his gun. "You'll be safe there. The commander's wife runs a women's aid society. They'll help you get established." "And you?" Abigail pressed. "Where will you go?" "Back to my duties," he said simply. "I'm assigned to the fort for another month, then I'm due in Cheyenne." Disappointment settled in Abigail's chest, though she tried to hide it. "Of course, you have your responsibilities." Kieran set his gun aside, his expression serious. "Abigail, I need to be honest with you. These past days, traveling together, getting to know you and the girls." He hesitated. "I've come to care for all of you, more than I should, perhaps." Abigail's heart quickened. "Kieran, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not offering anything right now. It would be wrong of me when you're vulnerable and dependent on my protection. But when you're settled, if you're willing, I'd like to court you properly." The words hung in the air between them, full of promise and uncertainty. Abigail looked at his face, strong and honest in the firelight. "I've been married before," she said softly. "I know what it is to love a good man, and I know what it is to lose him." She swallowed hard. "I'm not sure I'm brave enough to risk that again." Kieran reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers. "Bravery isn't about not feeling fear," he said. "It's about moving forward despite it, and you, Abigail Anders, are the bravest person I've ever met." They reached Fort Laramie on the 7th day of their journey. The fort stood impressive and reassuring, the American flag snapping in the breeze above solid wooden walls. Soldiers and civilians moved about with purpose, and for the first time in months, Abigail felt a sense of security. As Kieran had promised, they were welcomed warmly. The commander's wife, Mrs. Alina Hartwell, took Abigail and the girls under her wing immediately, arranging temporary quarters and introducing them to the small but growing community of families. "Your daughters will have proper schooling here," Alina assured Abigail as they toured the settlement. "And we desperately need someone with sewing skills. Several of the officers' wives have been complaining about the lack of a proper seamstress. The girls adapted quickly, making friends with other children and reveling in the safety of the fort. Mary was immediately enrolled in the small school, while Elizabeth helped care for her younger sisters when Abigail began taking in sewing. Kieran visited daily, though his duties often took him away for hours at a time. He brought small gifts for the girls: a carved wooden horse for Sarah, a book of poetry for Mary, colorful ribbons for Elizabeth and Catherine. For Abigail, he brought conversations, companionship, and a growing sense of possibility. 2 weeks after their arrival, news came that Silas Anders had suffered a fatal heart attack during a confrontation with the territorial governor over his actions. His sons, without their father's influence, had abandoned their claim on Thomas's homestead and returned to their own properties. "You could go back," Kieran said when he brought Abigail the news. They were walking along the parade ground, watching the girls play with other children. "The land is legally yours. No one would contest it now." Abigail considered the option, thinking of the home Thomas had built, the memories it held. Then she looked at her daughters, cheeks flushed with health and eyes bright with happiness. She looked at Kieran, patient and steady beside her. "That life is behind us now," she said finally. "There's nothing for us there but ghosts and painful memories." Kieran nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And here, Abigail said, allowing herself to smile, there might be a future." As summer turned to autumn, that future began to take shape. Abigail's sewing business flourished, and she was able to move her family from the temporary quarters to a small house at the edge of the settlement. The girls thrived. Mary excelled at school, Elizabeth revealed a talent for music, Catherine became known for her quick wit, and little Sarah charmed everyone she met. Kieran courted Abigail with respectful determination. They took Sunday walks after church, chaperoned by the girls. He joined them for supper twice a week, bringing fresh game or vegetables from the fort's garden. Slowly, Abigail allowed herself to open her heart again, to trust in the possibility of new love. On a crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch of her new home while the girls played inside, Kieran took her hand. "I received new orders today," he said. "I'm being reassigned to oversee the new territorial office in Laramie City." Abigail's heart sank. "When do you leave?" 2 weeks. He studied her face. "I'd like you and the girls to come with me." She blinked in surprise. "As what, Kieran?" He smiled, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "As my wife, if you'll have me, as my family." Tears filled Abigail's eyes as memories of Thomas mingled with hopes for the future. She had loved her first husband deeply, truly. But Thomas was gone, and her heart had found room for new love. "The girls," she began. "I've already asked for their blessing," Kieran admitted with a grin. "Mary made me promise to teach her to shoot. Elizabeth wants a new dress for the wedding. Catherine insisted on being flower girl, and Sarah simply asked if she could call me Papa." Laughter bubbled up through Abigail's tears. "You've thought of everything." "Not everything," Kieran said, his expression turning serious. "I can't replace Thomas in their lives or in your heart. I wouldn't want to try, but I can offer them a father who will cherish them for exactly who they are. And I can offer you a partner who sees your strength, your courage, and your heart as the treasures they are." Abigail looked at the man before her, the man who had lifted her daughters onto his horse and ridden away from danger, the man who had seen value in her when others saw only failure, the man who had given her family a future when they had none. "Yes," she whispered, extending her hand for the ring. "Yes, Kieran Zane, we will be your family." They were married in the fort's chapel the following Sunday, a simple ceremony attended by the entire settlement. Mary, Elizabeth, Catherine, and Sarah stood proudly beside their mother, no longer thin and frightened, but strong and hopeful. As Kieran recited his vows, his voice steady and sure, Abigail thought of the journey that had brought them to this moment, from starvation and fear to abundance and love. From a woman desperate to protect her daughters to a woman embracing a new beginning. I promise to cherish you and your daughters all the days of my life, Kieran vowed. To protect you, provide for you, and walk beside you through whatever challenges we face. And I promise to trust in this new journey, Abigail replied, her voice clear and strong. To open my heart to love again, and to build a family together based on respect, honesty, and devotion. When they were pronounced husband and wife, Kieran didn't just kiss his bride, he knelt down and embraced all 4 girls as well, gathering them into the circle of his arms as the congregation applauded. 2 weeks later, they departed for Laramie City, not on a single overburdened horse, but in a proper wagon drawn by a team of strong horses. Their belongings no longer just what they could carry, but furnishings for a new home, supplies for Abigail's sewing business. Books for the girls' education filled the wagon to capacity. As they crested the final hill before leaving Fort Laramie behind, Abigail looked back at the place that had offered them sanctuary. Then she turned to face forward, toward their future. Beside her, Kieran guided the horses with confident hands. Behind them, the girls sang a traveling song, their voices clear and joyful in the autumn air. "Are you ready?" Kieran asked, smiling down at her. Abigail leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady strength of the man who had become her second chance at happiness. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." As their wagon rolled toward Laramie City and their new life together, Abigail Anders Zane knew with certainty that the starvation of body, of spirit, of hope was finally over. In its place was abundance. 4 beloved daughters, a husband who valued them all, and a future bright with promise.